There's a certain kind of person who walks away from relationships like they're closing doors in an empty hallway. One by one, friends disappear. Family members get blocked. Romantic partners are left confused, wondering what they did wrong. And the person doing the cutting? They keep moving forward, convinced that isolation is the only way to find peace. But here's what most people don't realize. The pattern of cutting everyone off isn't usually about the people being removed. It's about something much deeper happening inside the person wielding the scissors. Psychologists have observed this pattern repeatedly. Someone builds a connection, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, or even a family bond. Then, without warning or often without a clear reason that others can understand, they sever it completely. No conversation, no closure, just silence. And if you ask them why, they might say things like, "I'm better off alone," or "they don't understand me." On the surface, these statements sound like boundaries. They sound like self-protection. But underneath, there's often a complex psychological landscape that's worth exploring. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine someone who has cut off their childhood friends, distanced themselves from their siblings, ended multiple romantic relationships abruptly, and now sits alone, scrolling through social media, seeing everyone else's connections and feeling both relieved and strangely empty. They tell themselves they chose this. They tell themselves it's healthier this way. But late at night, there's a whisper that asks, why does everyone leave, even though they're the one doing the leaving? This paradox, this internal contradiction, is at the heart of understanding the psychology of people who cut everyone off. From a psychological perspective, the act of cutting people off completely, what some therapists call relational amputation, often stems from one of several core wounds. The first and perhaps most common is a deep fear of abandonment. Now this might sound counterintuitive. Why would someone afraid of being abandoned choose to abandon others first? But that's exactly the mechanism at play. When you've been hurt by loss, rejection, or betrayal, especially in childhood, your nervous system learns to anticipate it. The brain develops a protective strategy. Leave before you're left. Cut ties before they are cut for you. It's a preemptive strike against pain. This is related to what attachment theory describes as an avoidant attachment style. People with this pattern learned early on that depending on others leads to disappointment. Maybe their caregivers were inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or dismissive of their needs. The child adapted by becoming self-reliant, by learning not to need anyone. As adults, these individuals often feel suffocated by closeness. Intimacy feels threatening because it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness. So when a relationship starts to deepen, when someone gets too close, the impulse is to run, to cut them off before the discomfort becomes unbearable. But there's another psychological root to this pattern, and it's about control. Think about how chaotic and unpredictable relationships can be. People have bad days, they say the wrong things, they forget important dates, they have needs that clash with yours. For someone who craves certainty and control, this unpredictability can feel intolerable. Cutting people off gives them back that control. It's a way of saying, I decide who stays and who goes. I'm not at the mercy of anyone else's choices. In a world that often feels overwhelming and uncontrollable, severing relationships can feel like the one area where they have absolute power. This need for control often connects to past trauma. When someone has experienced significant powerlessness, whether through abuse, neglect, or other traumatic circumstances, they may develop what's sometimes called hypervigilance to threats. They become extremely sensitive to any sign that someone might hurt them, betray them, or control them. A small disagreement becomes evidence that the person can't be trusted. A moment of thoughtlessness becomes proof that they don't really care. The threshold for cutting someone off becomes incredibly low because the psychological alarm system is set to maximum sensitivity. There's also the factor of black and white thinking, a cognitive pattern where people see things in extremes. Either you're perfect or you're worthless. Either this relationship is flawless or it's toxic. There's no room for the messy middle ground where real relationships actually exist. When someone operates from this mindset, any flaw, any disappointment, any conflict can trigger a complete rejection. The friend who forgot to call back isn't just forgetful. They're inconsiderate. The partner who disagreed isn't just having a different perspective. They're disrespecting you. And the only solution to imperfection is elimination. Now let's talk about what this looks like in practice. The person who cuts everyone off often has a history that reads like a series of chapters, each one ending abruptly. They'll describe their past with phrases like, "I got rid of toxic people," or "I realized they weren't real friends." And some of those assessments might be accurate. Not every relationship deserves to be maintained. But when the pattern repeats across different people, different contexts, different years, it suggests the common denominator isn't the other people. It's the internal framework through which relationships are being evaluated. These individuals often struggle with something psychologists call emotional permanence. This is the ability to hold on to the good in a relationship even when experiencing something negative. For most people, if a friend snaps at them during a stressful day, they can recognize that this moment doesn't erase years of kindness. But for someone with this pattern, the negative moment can completely overshadow everything positive that came before. The relationship is suddenly redefined by this single interaction, and cutting ties feels justified. There's often intense loneliness accompanying this pattern, even if the person won't admit it. They might say they prefer solitude, that people are draining, that they're happiest alone. And there may be truth to that in the moment, but humans are fundamentally social creatures. We're wired for connection. When someone systematically removes every meaningful relationship from their life, they're fighting against a basic psychological need. That internal conflict creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. They want connection but fear it. They crave understanding but push it away. They feel lonely but can't tolerate closeness. What's particularly challenging about this pattern is that it becomes self-reinforcing. Each time someone cuts off a relationship, it confirms their belief that people are disappointing, that connections don't last, that they're better off alone. It becomes evidence for the very worldview that's driving the behavior. And because they're the ones ending things, they never get to experience what might happen if they stayed. They never discover that people can work through conflict, that relationships can survive imperfection, that intimacy can deepen after rupture and repair. The impact on the people being cut off shouldn't be overlooked either. Being suddenly removed from someone's life without explanation or closure can be deeply painful. It leaves questions unanswered. It creates confusion and self-doubt. Friends and family members are often left wondering what they did wrong, replaying conversations, analyzing moments, trying to understand where things went so wrong that they warranted complete removal. This confusion can affect their other relationships, making them more anxious or more guarded. But here's where understanding becomes crucial. The person cutting everyone off isn't usually doing this to be cruel. They're doing it because it feels like survival. Their nervous system is telling them that connection equals danger, that vulnerability equals pain, that staying equals inevitable hurt. They're operating from a place of self-protection, even if that protection has become so extreme that it's actually causing the isolation they fear. So, what drives someone to this point? Often, it's a combination of factors. Maybe they grew up in an environment where emotional expression was punished. Maybe they experienced a significant betrayal that shattered their ability to trust. Maybe they witnessed their parents' relationships falling apart and learned that connections are temporary and painful. Maybe they were bullied or excluded, and the shame of that rejection became so unbearable that they decided to be the rejecter instead of the rejected. Whatever the origin, the pattern becomes a coping mechanism, albeit a maladaptive one. Technology also plays a role in this pattern. It's easier than ever to cut someone off. You can block someone with a tap. You can disappear from their life without ever having a conversation. The digital age has made all of this simple. There's no need to face the person, to have the uncomfortable discussion, to sit with the messiness of ending or repairing a relationship. You just remove them from your digital life, and in many ways, from your actual life. This ease can make the pattern more frequent and more automatic. Let's consider what happens to someone's sense of identity when they cut everyone off. Relationships aren't just about connection, they're mirrors. They reflect back to us who we are. Friends remind us of our humor, our kindness, our quirks. Family holds our history. Romantic partners see parts of us we can't see ourselves. When someone removes all these mirrors, their sense of self can become distorted. They're left with only their own internal narrative, and if that narrative is shaped by fear, shame, or distrust, it can become increasingly negative without external perspectives to challenge it. Yet here's something important. Just because this pattern is rooted in fear and past hurt doesn't mean it's permanent. The human capacity for change, for growth, for healing is profound. The first step is recognition. Not the recognition that certain people needed to be removed, but the recognition that there's a pattern, that the common thread across all these severed relationships might be an internal wound rather than external failures. This recognition often requires brutal honesty. It means asking difficult questions. Do I cut people off at the first sign of imperfection? Do I interpret normal human flaws as betrayals? Do I avoid conflict by avoiding the relationship entirely? Am I running from intimacy because I'm afraid of being hurt? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're necessary. They open the door to understanding that cutting everyone off isn't protecting you from pain. It's guaranteeing a different kind of pain, the pain of isolation. Healing from this pattern involves learning to tolerate discomfort in relationships. It means sitting with the anxiety that comes when someone knows you deeply. It means accepting that people will disappoint you sometimes, and that disappointment doesn't have to mean the end. It means developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience negative emotions without immediately acting to eliminate their source. It also involves challenging black and white thinking. This means practicing the uncomfortable middle ground, recognizing that someone can hurt you unintentionally and still care about you, that you can be angry with someone and still want them in your life, that imperfect relationships can still be meaningful, nourishing, and worth maintaining. This kind of thinking doesn't come naturally to someone who's been cutting people off. It requires conscious effort and practice. Another crucial element is learning to communicate before cutting. This means voicing your needs, your boundaries, your hurt before you disappear. It means giving people a chance to understand, to change, to repair. It means believing that relationships can survive honesty. For someone who cuts people off, this feels incredibly vulnerable. It feels like giving someone ammunition to hurt you, but it's also the only way to build genuine connection. The journey isn't about never-ending relationships. Some relationships do need to end. Some people are genuinely harmful. The difference is between discernment and defensiveness. Discernment means carefully evaluating whether a relationship is unhealthy and making a thoughtful decision. Defensiveness means reacting from fear and removing people preemptively. Learning to tell the difference takes time and often requires support, whether from therapy, trusted individuals who remain in your life, or deep self-reflection. What's powerful about breaking this pattern is that it doesn't just change your relationships. It changes your relationship with yourself. When you stop cutting everyone off, when you learn to stay even when it's uncomfortable, you're proving to yourself that you can handle connection. You're demonstrating that you're strong enough to be vulnerable, that you're resilient enough to work through conflict, that you're worthy of relationships that last. And here's the truth that might be hardest to accept. The people you've cut off probably weren't perfect. They probably did disappoint you, hurt you, or fail to meet your expectations in some way. But perfection isn't the standard for connection. Humanity is. The question isn't whether people will let you down. They will. The question is whether you can build relationships strong enough to survive that reality. If you're someone who cuts everyone off, you're not broken beyond repair. You're not destined for isolation. You're someone who learned to protect yourself in the only way you knew how. But protection that keeps everyone out also keeps you locked in. The walls you built to keep pain out are the same walls keeping connection out. And dismantling those walls, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, vulnerable moment by vulnerable moment, is how you discover something profound. You were never meant to do this life alone. And the relationships that survive imperfection, that grow through challenge, that deepen through honest communication, those are the ones that teach you what you've been missing all along, that you're not just worthy of connection, you're worthy of connection that stays.